She is a living testament to what it means to rise. Under the blinding lights of Hollywood, one smile could stop the world. It wasn't just any smile, it was her smile, Sandra Bullock, the woman who could make America laugh, cry, and believe in love again. But behind that radiant charm lay a story far deeper than the tabloids ever told. A journey carved from courage, heartbreak, and an unshakable will to rise again. From the daughter of a German opera singer to the queen of romantic comedies, Sandra became America's sweetheart. She had everything: fame, fortune, and the kind of love story that seemed written for the screen until it all fell apart. The betrayal, the silence, the reinvention. How did Sandra Bullock, a girl once mocked for her accent, become one of the most respected women in Hollywood? And what did she have to lose along the way? To understand her strength, we must go back to where it all began. Sandra Annette Bullock was born in Arlington, Virginia in 1964, far from the bright lights that would one day bear her name. Her father, John Bullock, was a voice coach and Army contractor. Her mother, Helga Meyer, a German opera singer, carried her daughter from one European stage to another. For years, Sandra's childhood was a blur of suitcases, dressing rooms, and echoes of music halls. While other children were playing outside, she was watching her mother transform on stage, a living lesson in performance, grace, and the power of presence. Yet behind the applause, there was isolation. Growing up between two cultures, American and German, Sandra never quite fit in. Her English came with a thick accent. Classmates mocked her, calling her weird. But every insult became fuel. Every lonely day, a quiet rehearsal for resilience. She found comfort in mimicry, copying voices, accents, and gestures, unknowingly training for the roles she'd one day conquer. And though she adored her mother, she also saw the cost of passion, the endless rehearsals, the exhaustion, the loneliness that lingered after the curtain fell. When Helga died suddenly in 2000, Sandra called her my anchor, my music, my home. But long before that, little Sandra had already learned one truth from watching her mother's world: that art, like love, demands everything and gives nothing back unless you fight for it. It was in those opera houses of Europe, among the gowns and spotlights, that the little girl who didn't fit in discovered where she truly belonged, on a stage under the light. In her 20s, Sandra Bullock arrived in New York City with nothing but a suitcase, a dream, and the stubbornness her mother had taught her. She studied acting at the neighborhood playhouse under Sanford Meisner's discipline, learning not just how to perform, but how to feel. Between auditions, she waited tables, parked cars, and even cleaned apartments just to make rent. Casting directors smiled politely but passed her over again and again. She wasn't glamorous enough, not mysterious enough, not Hollywood enough. But Sandra didn't give up. She took every role that came her way. A struggling waitress in off-Broadway plays, a background extra in forgotten TV pilots. She called it the education of rejection. Every no pushed her closer to the yes that would change her life. That yes came in 1994. A movie about a bus rigged to explode if it slowed down. Speed. The studio hesitated to cast her. She wasn't a big name, and her chemistry with Keanu Reeves was untested. But from the moment cameras rolled, she was the film. Annie Porter, funny, brave, ordinary, yet extraordinary, became the heartbeat of the movie. When Speed hit theaters, it wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural explosion. Audiences fell in love with the girl who drove the bus, and with the woman who played her. Overnight, Sandra Bullock became America's new obsession. Fame for the first time was real and terrifying. As she later recalled, "You dream of success your whole life, and when it happens you realize you're not ready for it." The world had finally noticed her. But fame, like Speed, comes with one rule: you can't slow down. After Speed, Hollywood couldn't get enough of Sandra Bullock. She wasn't the typical leading lady. No air of superiority, no untouchable glamour. She was warm, spontaneous, real. The girl next door who somehow made stardom look effortless. The late 1990s became her golden era. With hits like While You Were Sleeping, The Net, and Miss Congeniality, Sandra defined what it meant to be America's sweetheart. Her blend of humor, humility, and vulnerability made audiences feel like they knew her, not as a celebrity, but as a friend. Behind the scenes, though, she was far from naive. Sandra understood that Hollywood adored its sweethearts, but only for as long as they stayed inside the box. Producers wanted her in rom-coms, smiling and charming her way through predictable scripts. But she wanted more. She wanted control. In 1995, she founded her own production company, Fortis Films, to develop the kind of stories she believed in. She began producing her own movies, a bold move for a woman in an industry still dominated by men. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about authorship. Sandra Bullock wanted to write her own narrative, both on-screen and off. Her choice paid off. Miss Congeniality, 2000, which she also produced, became a global hit, reminding the world that beauty and strength could coexist with laughter. Still, the higher she climbed, the heavier the spotlight became. Tabloids followed her every move. Rumors, relationships, headlines, all trying to define who she was. But through it all, Sandra kept smiling. Not because everything was perfect, but because she refused to let the noise dictate her story. By the dawn of the new millennium, she wasn't just a movie star. She was a symbol of wit, grace, and quiet defiance. And soon, she would prove that her range went far beyond the smiles that made her famous. By the late 2000s, Sandra Bullock had achieved what many only dream of: the rare balance between box office power and universal affection. She was no longer just America's sweetheart. She was its heart, strong, kind, and impossibly relatable. Then came The Blind Side, 2009. The story of Leigh Ann Tuohy, a fierce, compassionate woman who took in a homeless teen and helped him find his way, resonated deeply with Sandra. It was a role that demanded both grit and grace, and she poured herself into it completely. When she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, standing on that stage in tears, it wasn't just another Hollywood victory. It was a lifetime of perseverance finally being seen. The girl who once waited tables in New York had just conquered the biggest stage in the world. But Sandra being Sandra, she didn't let the glory make her untouchable. Just one night before the Oscars, she attended the Razzie Awards to accept, in person, her Worst Actress trophy for All About Steve. She walked in smiling, carrying DVDs of the movie to hand out to the audience. The crowd roared. It was classic Bullock, humility wrapped in humor. The rare star who could laugh at herself while the world was bowing at her feet. At that moment, she had it all: critical acclaim, box office success, and what appeared to be a loving marriage to TV personality Jesse James. She had built the perfect Hollywood fairy tale: the career, the family, the love story. But what Sandra didn't know was that, behind the applause and the headlines, the fairy tale was about to shatter. Her greatest professional triumph was about to be followed by her most devastating personal heartbreak. Because sometimes, the higher the light shines, the darker the shadows become. Just weeks after holding her Oscar, Sandra Bullock's world collapsed. Tabloid headlines screamed betrayal. Her husband, Jesse James, had been unfaithful. The images flooded the internet. The details were cruel, and the timing was merciless. The woman who had just been celebrated as Hollywood's golden soul was suddenly at the center of its ugliest storm. In the same month she became an Academy Award winner, she also became a tabloid target. Fame, once her ally, turned on her with ferocity. Sandra disappeared. She canceled red carpets, skipped interviews, and retreated into silence. Friends later said she stopped answering calls. Her smile, that famous, effortless smile, vanished from every screen. But in that silence, something profound was happening. Away from the cameras, Sandra finalized the adoption of her son, Louis, a process she had begun months earlier, in secret. While the world speculated about her pain, she was quietly becoming a mother. She once said, "The family I was meant to have found me, not the other way around." It was as if life, in its cruelest irony, had taken everything from her only to give her something far more precious. The tabloids expected a breakdown. Instead, she rebuilt. Sandra's response to betrayal was not rage or revenge, it was resilience. She learned that sometimes strength isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stand up, move forward, and love again, even when the world is watching you bleed. Her silence spoke louder than any scandal. And when she finally returned to the screen, she wasn't just a star, she was a survivor. After the chaos, Sandra Bullock didn't rush back into the spotlight. She chose peace over publicity, motherhood over media. While Hollywood waited for her next move, she focused on rebuilding, quietly, deliberately, and on her own terms. And then came Gravity, 2013, a role that would define not just her career, but her resilience. As Dr. Ryan Stone, a woman stranded in the void of space, clinging to life after losing everything, Sandra wasn't acting. She was reflecting. Every tear, every breathless moment of isolation felt like a metaphor for her own survival. The film became a global phenomenon, grossing over $700 million and earning her another Oscar nomination. But more than the accolades, Gravity proved something deeper. That Sandra Bullock could rise again. Not in spite of her pain, but because of it. In interviews, she spoke softly about what she'd learned. The things I thought defined me were never really mine. What's real is what's left when the noise fades. She embraced simplicity, raising her children, producing films, and choosing projects that moved her rather than defined her image. Gone was the need to please everyone. In its place was authenticity, calm and quiet power. Sandra Bullock had reinvented herself, not as a Hollywood icon chasing roles, but as a woman grounded in grace. She no longer needed to be seen by the world to know who she was. Today, Sandra Bullock stands as more than just a movie star. She's a symbol of strength, compassion, and authenticity in an industry built on illusion. Her legacy isn't measured in box office numbers or trophies, but in the quiet dignity with which she's faced both triumph and tragedy. For decades, audiences have watched her evolve. From the quirky girl next door to the commanding woman who owns every frame she appears in. She showed that vulnerability isn't weakness, that kindness can exist in power, and that laughter can be an act of courage. Off-screen, she's become one of Hollywood's most generous philanthropists. She has quietly donated millions to disaster relief efforts, from 9/11 to Hurricane Katrina, to wildfires and beyond, always refusing to make it a headline. Because for Sandra, giving isn't an act of publicity. It's an act of gratitude. Her work continues to inspire women to take control of their careers, to stand firm in their worth, and to lead with empathy rather than ego. She opened doors not just as a performer, but as a producer, paving the way for more female voices in Hollywood's boardrooms and scripts. In a town obsessed with reinvention, Sandra Bullock has done it in the most powerful way, by remaining true to herself. Her grace, her humor, her resilience, these are the roles that time will never fade. Sandra didn't just survive Hollywood, she humanized it. As the lights fade and the cameras turn away, Sandra Bullock remains, calm, steady, and quietly radiant. She has faced the cruelty of fame, the sting of betrayal, and the silence of loss. Yet somehow she still chooses kindness. Her journey reminds us that survival isn't just about enduring pain. It's about transforming it. That grace isn't born from perfection, but from perseverance. Sandra Bullock once said, "I don't need a perfect life. I just need a life that's real." And perhaps that's her greatest role of all. Not the movie star, not the sweetheart, but the woman who dared to live truthfully in a world built on illusion. Fame fades. But grace, her grace, will never fade.